They were supposed to grow old together. Mark and Emily Thompson had 3 days of marriage under their belts and a lifetime of dreams packed in their burgundy Taurus when they drove into the Oregon mountains that September morning in 1987. But nightfall, they had vanished without a trace. No bodies, no ransom demands, no answers. Just two families left to wonder if their children were living new lives somewhere or lying dead in a ditch. 25 years later, a construction worker's shovel would reveal the truth was darker than anyone imagined. Because some people don't just disappear, they're made to disappear. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The burgundy 1986 Ford Taurus hummed along Interstate 84, carrying its precious cargo through the breathtaking landscapes of the Pacific Northwest. Mark Thompson gripped the steering wheel with one hand while reaching over to squeeze his wife's fingers with the other. Emily laughed, her wedding ring catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the passenger window. "Can you believe we're actually married?" she said, her voice filled with wonder as she gazed at the towering evergreens that lined the highway like silent sentinels. Mark grinned, his brown eyes sparkling with the same joy that had lit up his face 3 days earlier when Emily walked down the aisle in her grandmother's lace dress. "Mrs. Thompson, I've been believing it since the moment you said yes to my terrible proposal at Navy Pier." "Hey, that proposal wasn't terrible," Emily protested, though her smile betrayed her amusement. "It was just very you, nervous, sweet, and completely unforgettable." They had left Chicago 2 days ago, their car packed with wedding gifts, suitcases, and dreams of adventure. The honeymoon road trip had been Emily's idea. She'd always wanted to see the rugged coastline of Oregon, to breathe the salty air of the Pacific, and walk hand in hand along beaches she'd only seen in magazines. Mark, ever the practical accountant, had initially suggested a resort in Florida, but one look at Emily's excited face as she spread tourism brochures across their kitchen table had sealed the deal. The vintage camcorder sat on the dashboard, its red recording light blinking steadily as it captured their journey. Mark had bought it as a surprise, wanting to document every moment of their first adventure as husband and wife. "Tell the camera where we're going," Mark said, nodding toward the device. Emily picked up the camcorder and turned it toward herself, her blonde hair whipping in the breeze from the partially open window. "This is Emily Thompson, still getting used to that name, and we're driving through Oregon on our way to the coast. It's September 15th, 1987, and this is the most beautiful place I've ever seen." She turned the camera toward Mark, who waved without taking his eyes off the road. "And this is my handsome husband, who's been driving for 6 hours straight because he doesn't trust me with his precious car." "I trust you with my life, Em, just not with my transmission," Mark replied, earning himself a playful punch in the arm. As the day wore on, the landscape began to change. The towering mountains gave way to rolling hills dotted with small towns that seemed frozen in time. Weathered barns stood alongside modern gas stations, and hand-painted signs advertised everything from fresh berries to antique furniture. It was quintessential small-town America, the kind of place where everyone knew their neighbors and strangers were greeted with curious but friendly smiles. By late afternoon, fatigue began to creep into Mark's shoulders. He'd been driving since dawn, determined to make good time on their journey to the coast. Emily noticed his subtle yawns and the way he rolled his neck at red lights. "Why don't we find a place to stop for the night?" she suggested, consulting the AAA triptych they'd marked up with potential stops. "There's a town called Millbrook about 20 miles ahead. It looks charming." Mark nodded gratefully. "That sounds perfect. We're not in any rush, are we?" "We have the rest of our lives," Emily replied, leaning over to kiss his cheek. Millbrook turned out to be exactly the kind of place they'd imagined. A single main street lined with locally owned shops, a diner with checkered curtains in the windows, and a small motel with a neon sign that flickered Pine Grove Motor Lodge in cheerful green letters. The town couldn't have had more than a few hundred residents, but it possessed a charm that immediately appealed to the young couple from the big city. Mark pulled into the motel's gravel parking lot, the Taurus's tires crunching over small stones. The Pine Grove Motor Lodge was a classic single-story establishment with 12 rooms, arranged in an L shape around a small courtyard. Each door was painted a different pastel color, and flower boxes beneath the windows overflowed with petunias and marigolds. It was the kind of place their parents might have stayed on family vacations in the 1960s. The motel office was housed in a small building at the entrance to the courtyard, its windows covered with faded travel brochures and a hand-lettered sign, advertising clean rooms, fair prices, friendly service. A bell above the door chimed as Mark and Emily entered hand in hand. Behind the desk stood a woman in her 50s with graying hair pulled back in a neat bun. Her name tag read Dorothy, and her smile was genuinely warm as she looked up from a paperback romance novel. "Well, hello there," Dorothy said, setting down her book. "You folks need a room for the night?" "Yes, please," Mark replied, unconsciously straightening his shoulders the way he did whenever he handled business matters. "Just for one night. We're on our honeymoon, driving to the coast." Dorothy's face lit up with delight. "Oh, how wonderful. Congratulations, you two. When did you get married?" 3 days ago, Emily answered, holding up her left hand to show off her simple gold band. "We're from Chicago." "Chicago. My goodness, you've come a long way. Well, let me get you set up in our nicest room." Dorothy pulled out a registration card and slid it across the counter, along with a pen. "That'll be room 7. It's got a lovely view of the mountains and a little kitchenette if you want to make coffee in the morning." Mark filled out the registration card in his neat accountant's handwriting. Mr. and Mrs. Mark Thompson, 1247, North Clark Street, Chicago, Illinois. Under license plate, he wrote down the Taurus's Illinois plates, and under make model, he noted 1986 Ford Taurus Burgundy. "That'll be $32 for the night," Dorothy said, accepting Mark's cash payment. "Checkout is at 11, but if you need a little extra time, just let me know. We're not busy this time of year." She handed them a key attached to a small plastic diamond with the number 7 embossed in gold. "There's a nice little restaurant just down the street, Mabel's Diner. Best apple pie in 3 counties, and they stay open until 9. You might also want to check out Henderson's General Store if you need anything for the road. Old Mr. Henderson has been running that place since before I was born." Mark and Emily thanked Dorothy and walked back to their car to get their overnight bags. The sun was beginning to set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too vivid to be real. Emily retrieved the camcorder and filmed the sunset, narrating their arrival at the Pine Grove Motor Lodge for their future selves to remember. Room 7 was exactly as Dorothy had promised, clean, comfortable, and decorated with knotty pine. Furniture that matched the motel's rustic charm. The bedspread was a cheerful yellow gingham, and landscape paintings of the Oregon countryside hung on the walls. Through the window, they could see the mountains silhouetted against the darkening sky. After freshening up, they walked hand in hand down Millbrook's main street to Mabel's Diner. The restaurant was busy for such a small town, filled with families, finishing their dinners, and a few elderly men nursing cups of coffee at the counter. The waitress, a teenager with braces and an easy smile, seated them in a booth near the window, where they could watch the quiet evening life of the town unfold. They ordered the daily special, meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans, and split a slice of the famous apple pie. The food was simple but delicious, the kind of home-style cooking that reminded them both of their childhoods. They talked about their plans for the coast, about the little house they were renting in, Lincoln Park, about Mark's upcoming promotion at the accounting firm, and Emily's job at the elementary school. "I love how quiet it is here," Emily said, looking out at the nearly empty street. "It's so different from Chicago." "Different isn't necessarily bad," Mark agreed, though he was already missing the energy of the city. "It's nice for a visit, but I think I'd go crazy living in a place this small." "I don't know," Emily mused, watching an elderly man walk his dog past the diner. "There's something appealing about knowing everyone in town, about being part of a real community." They lingered over coffee, reluctant to end the perfect day. Eventually, though, the young waitress began stacking chairs on tables, and they took the hint. Mark left a generous tip, and they strolled back to the Pine Grove Motor Lodge under a canopy of stars more brilliant than anything they ever saw in Chicago's light-polluted sky. As they approached their room, Emily noticed a man sitting in a chair outside room 3, smoking a cigarette and watching them with unusual intensity. He was middle-aged with unkempt brown hair and clothing that had seen better days. When he caught Emily looking at him, he quickly averted his gaze, but she could feel his eyes on them as Mark unlocked their door. "Did you see that man?" she whispered to Mark once they were inside their room. "What man?" Mark asked, hanging his jacket on the back of a chair, "the one sitting outside room 3. He was staring at us. Mark peered through the window blinds. The chair was empty now, and the light in room 3 was off. "I don't see anyone. Maybe he was just curious about the newcomers, small town and all that." Emily nodded, but something about the man's stare had made her uncomfortable. She tried to shake off the feeling as they prepared for bed, attributing her unease to being in an unfamiliar place. They fell asleep to the sound of crickets chirping outside their window. Emily curled against Mark's side as he stroked her hair. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful, with golden sunlight streaming through their window and the promise of another perfect day on the road. They woke early, eager to reach the coast by afternoon. After quick showers, they packed their bags and loaded the car, planning to grab breakfast at a diner they'd seen on the way out of town. Mark went to the office to return their key while Emily waited in the car, the engine running and the radio playing softly. Dorothy wasn't at the desk. Instead, a teenage boy who must have been her son or grandson handled the checkout process with adolescent efficiency. "Thanks for staying with us," the boy said, accepting the key. "Hope you folks have a great rest of your trip." "We will," Mark replied, genuinely meaning it. The Pine Grove Motor Lodge had been exactly what they'd needed, clean, comfortable, and full of small-town charm. He returned to the car where Emily was consulting their map, tracing their route to the coast with her finger. "Ready for the Pacific Ocean, Mrs. Thompson?" "More than ready, Mr. Thompson." Mark backed the burgundy Taurus out of the parking space, and they drove away from the Pine Grove Motor Lodge, waving goodbye to Dorothy, who had emerged from the office to tend to her flower boxes. Neither of them noticed the man from room 3, watching from behind a curtain, or the way he quickly gathered his things and checked out just minutes after they left. The road to the coast wound through increasingly dense forests, past rushing streams and hidden valleys that seemed untouched by the modern world. Emily filmed everything with their camcorder, creating a visual diary of their journey that they planned to watch on their first anniversary. They stopped at scenic overlooks and roadside fruit stands, collecting memories and moments that they believed would last a lifetime. But somewhere between Millbrook and the coast, between the last known sighting and their planned destination, Mark and Emily Thompson simply vanished. Their burgundy Ford Taurus, their camping equipment, their wedding gifts, their dreams of the future, all of it disappeared as completely as if they had never existed at all. 25 years had passed since Mark and Emily Thompson drove away from the Pine Grove Motor Lodge on that September morning in 1987. The world had changed dramatically in those years. The Berlin Wall had fallen. The internet had revolutionized communication, and cell phones had become as common as wristwatches. But in Millbrook, Oregon, time seemed to move at its own pace, and many things remained exactly as they had been in the 1980s. Jake Miller wiped the sweat from his forehead as he climbed down from his excavator, the morning sun already beating down on the construction site with unusual intensity for early October. At 53, Jake had been working construction for over 30 years, and his weathered hands and sun-lined face told the story of countless projects under the open sky. This particular job, a highway expansion project designed to ease traffic flow through the increasingly popular tourist corridor, was supposed to be routine. The Oregon Department of Transportation had hired Jake's company, Cascade Construction, to widen a 2-mile stretch of Highway 26 just outside Millbrook. The work involved moving tons of earth, relocating utility lines, and rebuilding several culverts that had been overwhelmed by recent heavy rains. It was the kind of project Jake could do in his sleep, but something about this particular site had been bothering him for weeks. "Hey, Jake," called Tommy Rodriguez, his youngest crew member at 24. Tommy was eager, hard-working, and reminded Jake of himself at that age, full of ambition and convinced he could move mountains with the right equipment. "You want me to start on that section by the old culvert?" Jake nodded, but his attention was focused on a section of earth about 50 yards from where Tommy was working. For the past 3 days, something had been nagging at him about that spot. The ground looked different somehow, less settled than the surrounding area, as if it had been disturbed relatively recently. In construction, you developed an eye for these things. Natural earth had a certain consistency, a way of laying that came from years of settling and weathering. Disturbed earth, even earth that had been disturbed decades ago, looked different to an experienced eye. "I'm going to check something out," Jake told Tommy, starting up his smaller excavator. "Keep working on that section, but be careful around the utilities." Jake guided his machine to the suspicious area, lowering the bucket to scrape away the top layer of soil. Almost immediately, he knew his instincts had been correct. The earth here was definitely different, darker, more compacted, with none of the natural layering he expected to see. Someone had dug here before, and not that long ago in geological terms. As he continued carefully excavating, removing thin layers of earth, Jake's bucket struck something hard. The metallic clang echoed across the construction site, causing several other workers to stop what they were doing and look over. Jake shut off the excavator and climbed down to investigate. Partially buried in the dark earth was what appeared to be a piece of rusted metal. As Jake brushed away the soil with his gloved hands, the shape became clearer. It was a car bumper, still bearing traces of burgundy paint beneath the rust and corrosion. "Tommy!" Jake called out, his voice carrying an urgency that made his young colleague drop his tools and jog over. "Get on the radio and call the office. Tell them to contact the sheriff's department right away." Tommy's eyes widened as he saw what Jake had uncovered. Is that from a car?" "Yeah, and from the looks of it, it's been down there for a while." Jake stood up, wiping his hands on his work pants. His mind was already racing through the implications. Cars didn't bury themselves, and whoever had put this one in the ground had gone to considerable effort to hide it. Within an hour, the construction site had been transformed into a crime scene. Sheriff's deputies had cordoned off the area with yellow tape, and Detective Sarah Lopez had arrived to oversee the investigation. At 45, Lopez was a 20-year veteran of the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department, though she looked younger than her years, with her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and sharp brown eyes that missed nothing. Lopez had been a rookie patrol officer in 1987 when Mark and Emily Thompson disappeared. She remembered the case well. It had been her first major missing persons investigation, and the failure to find any trace of the young couple had haunted her throughout her career. Every few years, she would pull the file and review the evidence. hoping to spot something that had been missed. The case had shaped her approach to law enforcement, making her more thorough, more persistent, and more aware of how easily people could simply vanish. "What do we have, Jake?" Lopez asked, pulling on latex gloves as she approached the excavation site. Jake explained how he'd noticed the disturbed earth and decided to investigate. "I've been doing this for 30 years, Detective, and you learned to read the ground. This soil was definitely moved, probably a long time ago, but not long enough for nature to completely reclaim it." Lopez nodded, studying the partially exposed bumper. Even covered in rust and corrosion, she could make out enough detail to hazard a guess about the vehicle's age and make. "I'm going to call in the state crime scene unit," she said. "This needs to be excavated properly, with everything documented." As they waited for the specialists to arrive, Lopez found herself thinking about the Thompson case. A burgundy 1986 Ford Taurus had vanished without a trace 25 years ago, along with a young couple on their honeymoon. The timing and location were certainly suggestive, but she forced herself to remain objective. Hundreds of cars had been abandoned or stolen over the years. This could be anything. The crime scene technicians arrived in the early afternoon, led by Dr. Patricia Williams, the state's chief forensic archaeologist. Dr. Williams was a meticulous woman in her 60s who had worked dozens of similar excavations, and she approached the site with the same careful methodology she would use at an ancient burial ground. "We're going to treat this like an archaeological dig," Dr. Williams explained to the assembled law enforcement officers. "Every inch will be photographed and mapped before we remove it. If there's evidence here, we don't want to destroy it through careless excavation." The process was painstakingly slow. Working with brushes, small tools, and careful application of the excavator, the team gradually revealed more of the buried vehicle. By late afternoon, they had uncovered enough to confirm that it was indeed a Ford Taurus from the mid-1980s, and more importantly, that it was burgundy in color beneath the years of rust and decay. Detective Lopez felt her heart rate increase as she watched the excavation. The coincidences were becoming too numerous to ignore. A burgundy Ford Taurus from the right time period, buried in a remote location near where the Thompsons were last seen. She pulled out her cell phone and called the department. "This is Lopez. I need you to pull the Thompson file from 1987, the missing honeymoon couple. Bring it out to the Highway 26 construction site, along with any photos of their vehicle." As the sun began to set, Dr. Williams made a discovery that confirmed Lopez's growing suspicions. Working carefully around the driver's door, she uncovered a section of the vehicle identification number that was still legible despite the corrosion. "Detective Lopez," she called out, "I think you need to see this." Lopez hurried over, crouching beside the partially excavated car. Dr. Williams pointed to a series of numbers and letters etched into the metal, even corroded and dirty enough of the VIN was visible to run a check. 20 minutes later, Lopez's phone rang with the confirmation she had been both hoping for and dreading. The VIN matched the registration for a 1986 Ford Taurus purchased by Mark Thompson of Chicago, Illinois, in March of 1987. The car he and his bride had been driving when they disappeared. "We've found them," Lopez said quietly, the weight of 25 years settling on her shoulders. "After all this time, we've actually found them, but finding the car was only the beginning." As Dr. Williams and her team continued their careful excavation, working now under portable floodlights, they made discoveries that turned a missing persons case into a definite homicide investigation. In the driver's seat, they found skeletal remains that would later be identified through dental records as Mark Thompson. He had been shot once in the back of the head, the bullet still lodged in what remained of the dashboard. In the passenger seat, more skeletal remains. Emily Thompson, who appeared to have died not from violence but from being trapped in the buried car, probably succumbing to asphyxiation or dehydration, personal effects found in the car, included Emily's purse with her driver's license still intact in a plastic sleeve, Mark's wallet with credit cards and family photos, and most heartbreakingly, their camcorder. The device was severely corroded, but forensic specialists would later be able to recover some of the footage, including their final recorded moments driving through the Oregon countryside, laughing and planning their future together. As news of the discovery spread, media outlets from across the country descended on Millbrook. The story had everything that captured public imagination: young love, mysterious disappearance, a decades-long cold case finally solved. CNN, Fox News, and all the major networks sent crews to cover the story, transforming the quiet town into a temporary media circus. The Pine Grove Motor Lodge, where Mark and Emily had spent their last known night, became a focal point for reporters and curiosity seekers. Dorothy Henderson, now in her 70s but still sharp as ever, found herself giving interviews about the young couple she remembered so clearly. They were so happy, she told a reporter from NBC News, standing in front of room 7, where the Thompsons had stayed, so full of life and love, it just breaks your heart to think what happened to them. The discovery of Mark and Emily Thompson's remains breathed new life into a case that had been cold for 25 years. Detective Sarah Lopez found herself at the center of what would become the most high-profile investigation of her career, and she was determined to finally get justice for the young couple whose disappearance had haunted her since her rookie days. Lopez assembled a task force that included forensic specialists, experienced detectives from neighboring counties, and FBI agents with expertise in cold cases. The team set up operations in the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department's largest conference room, covering the walls with photographs, timelines, and evidence boards that traced every known detail of the Thompsons' final days. The first priority was re-interviewing everyone who had been questioned in 1987. Some witnesses had died in the intervening years, others had moved away and proven difficult to track down, but Lopez was determined to speak with anyone who might have new information or might remember details differently after so much time had passed. Dorothy Henderson was among the first to be re-interviewed. Now 76 and retired from running the Pine Grove Motor Lodge, she welcomed Detective Lopez into her small house behind the motel with the same warmth she had shown to guests for decades. "I've thought about that young couple every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance," Dorothy said, serving Lopez coffee from a pot that had been brewing since dawn. Such a sweet pair. You could tell they were genuinely in love, not just caught up in wedding excitement. Lopez pulled out her notebook and the original case file. "Mrs. Henderson, I want you to think back to that night, September 16th, 1987. Do you remember anything unusual happening? Any other guests who stood out?" Dorothy's face grew thoughtful as she sipped her coffee. "You know, Detective, I've been thinking about this ever since you found their poor car. There was another guest that night, someone who paid cash and didn't want to fill out the registration completely. This was new information." Lopez felt her pulse quicken as she leaned forward. "Can you tell me more about this guest? He checked in maybe an hour after the young couple. Rough-looking man, probably in his 40s. He said his name was Rick Hansen, but when I asked for his license plate number, he said he'd parked around back and couldn't remember it. I thought that was odd, but we weren't busy, so I didn't push it." Lopez was already making notes. In the original investigation, no mention had been made of another guest that night. Either Dorothy hadn't thought to mention it at the time, or the investigating officers hadn't considered it significant enough to include in their reports. "What else do you remember about this man? What did he look like?" Dorothy closed her eyes, concentrating. Medium height, brown hair that needed cutting. He had on a denim jacket and jeans, both pretty worn. There was something about his eyes that made me uncomfortable. They were always moving, looking around like he was nervous or planning something, and he had these tattoos on his hands, crude-looking things like he might have done them himself. Did you see him after he checked in? That's the thing that's been bothering me, Dorothy said, setting down her coffee cup. I couldn't sleep that night. I had a toothache that was just killing me. Around 2 in the morning, I got up to take some aspirin and happened to look out my window. I could see room 3 where this Rick Hansen was staying, and there was no light on. But I could swear I saw someone moving around outside, near where the young couple had parked their car. Lopez felt a chill run down her spine. Are you certain about this? I can't be 100% certain it was him, but who else would it have been? And when I got up the next morning, both the young couple and this Rick Hansen were gone. I found it strange that they'd all leave so early without saying goodbye or asking about breakfast. This was potentially the break Lopez had been hoping for. She spent another hour with Dorothy, going over every detail of that night and the following morning. When she left the elderly woman's house, she was carrying photocopies of the motel registry from September 1987, including the entry for Rick Hansen in Dorothy's careful handwriting. Back at the sheriff's department, Lopez immediately ran the name through various databases. Rick Hansen was common enough that hundreds of results came back, but she methodically began checking each one, looking for men who would have been in their 40s in 1987 and had criminal records that might explain their nervousness around law enforcement. Meanwhile, other members of the task force were pursuing different leads. The forensic examination of the car had revealed fingerprints on the dashboard and steering wheel that didn't belong to Mark or Emily Thompson. The prints were remarkably well preserved, despite being buried for 25 years, protected by the car's interior from the elements. Detective Mike Walsh, a fingerprint specialist on loan from the state police, ran the unknown prints through the automated fingerprint identification system. The technology that had been science fiction in 1987 was now routine, and within hours, Walsh had a match. "Lopez, you need to see this," Walsh called out from his computer workstation. "I got a hit on those prints from the car." Lopez hurried over, her heart racing with anticipation. On Walsh's computer screen was a booking photo and criminal record for Richard Allen Harlan, a career criminal with a history of theft, assault, and fraud. The photo showed a man in his early 40s with brown hair and cold, calculating eyes that matched Dorothy's description perfectly. Rick Hansen, Lopez breathed. He used an alias at the motel. According to his criminal record, Harlan had been arrested in Portland, Oregon on September 21, 1987, just 5 days after the Thompsons disappeared. He had been charged with burglary and had served 18 months in the Oregon State Penitentiary. Since then, he had been in and out of prison regularly, most recently serving time for armed robbery. "Where is he now?" Lopez asked. Walsh scrolled through the database. "He's currently incarcerated at the Oregon State Penitentiary, scheduled for release in 2015. Lopez felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. After 25 years, she finally had a viable suspect in the Thompson murders. But getting a confession from a career criminal who had managed to keep his involvement secret for decades would be no easy task. The next morning, Lopez and FBI agent Karen Reeves drove to the Oregon State Penitentiary in Salem. Reeves was a veteran of cold case investigations, with a reputation for getting hardened criminals to open up about long-buried secrets. Her approach was patient, methodical, and psychologically sophisticated, exactly what this case required. Richard Harlan was brought into the interview room in shackles, his grey prison uniform hanging loosely on his thin frame. At 67, he looked older than his years, with deep lines around his eyes and the pale complexion of someone who had spent most of his adult life behind bars. When he saw the detectives waiting for him, his expression immediately became Guarded. I don't know why you're here, Harlan said before either detective could speak. I haven't done anything wrong in here. We're not here about anything recent, Richard, Lopez said, keeping her voice calm and professional. We want to talk to you about something that happened in 1987. Harlan's eyes flickered with what might have been recognition, but his expression remained neutral. 1987 was a long time ago. I don't remember much from back then. Agent Reeves pulled out a photograph of Mark and Emily Thompson taken on their wedding day. The image showed them smiling radiantly at the camera. Their whole lives ahead of them. Do you remember this couple, Richard? Mark and Emily Thompson? For just a moment, Harlan's mask slipped, and Lopez saw something that might have been guilt or regret flash across his face. But he quickly recovered, shaking his head. Never seen them before. That's interesting, Lopez said, pulling out the fingerprint report. Because we found your fingerprints all over their car, the car we just excavated from a makeshift grave outside Millbrook, Oregon. Harlan stared at the report without speaking, his mind clearly racing through options and calculations. Lopez could see him weighing his chances, trying to figure out how much the police knew and how much they were guessing. You checked into the Pine Grove Motor Lodge on September 16, 1987, using the name Rick Hansen. Agent Reeves continued. You paid cash and provided false information on the registration. The next morning, you, Mark Thompson, and Emily Thompson all disappeared. You can't prove anything, Harlan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Lopez leaned forward across the small table. Actually, Richard, we can prove quite a lot. We have your fingerprints in their car. We have a witness who saw you acting suspiciously that night. We have forensic evidence from the burial site. What we don't have is your side of the story. The interview continued for 2 hours, with Harlan maintaining his innocence despite mounting evidence. But Lopez could see cracks forming in his composure. He was an old man facing the rest of his life in prison, and the weight of carrying his secret for 25 years was clearly taking its toll. As they prepared to leave, Agent Reeves played one final card. You know, Richard, Mark and Emily had only been married for 3 days when you killed them. They were on their honeymoon, starting their life together. Emily was 24 years old. She died slowly in that buried car, probably calling out for help that never came. For the first time since the interview began, Harlan's composure completely cracked. His hands began to shake, and Lopez saw tears forming in his eyes. You don't understand, he said quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Lopez and Agent Reeves exchanged glances. After 25 years, they were finally going to learn the truth about what happened to Mark and Emily Thompson. Tell us what was supposed to happen, Richard, Lopez said gently. Help us understand. Harlan was quiet for a long moment, staring at his shackled hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. I just wanted their money. Young couple like that probably had credit cards, cash for their honeymoon. It was supposed to be simple, and with those words, the mystery that had haunted Millbrook, Oregon for 25 years finally began to unravel. Richard Harlan's admission that he had only wanted their money hung in the air of the prison interview room like a death sentence finally pronounced after 25 years of silence. Detective Sarah Lopez felt her heart pounding as she realized they were about to hear the truth about what happened to Mark and Emily Thompson on that September night in 1987. Agent Karen Reeves leaned forward slightly, her voice gentle but firm. Richard, we need you to tell us everything. Start from the beginning. How did you first encounter Mark and Emily? Harlan's hands continued to shake as he stared at the metal table between them. When he finally began to speak, his voice was hollow, as if the words were being dragged from some deep, dark place he'd tried to bury for decades. I was staying at that little motel, the Pine Grove place. I'd been driving around Oregon for weeks, Just trying to stay ahead of some people I owed money to in California. I saw this young couple check in ahead of me. They were so damn happy, laughing and touching each other all the time. Made me sick, you know? All that happiness when my life was falling apart. Lopez made notes while maintaining eye contact with Harlan. Every word was being recorded, but she wanted to capture the nuances of his confession, the little details that might prove crucial later. I registered under a fake name because I always did that back then. Kept me harder to track down. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that couple, how they probably had credit cards, cash for their honeymoon, maybe even jewelry. Young people like that, from Chicago, they had to have money. "So what did you do?" Agent Reeves asked. Harlan closed his eyes as if he could shut out the memory. "Around 2 in the morning, I went outside to smoke a cigarette and look at their car. It was unlocked. Can you believe that? Who leaves their car unlocked? I was just going to take whatever cash they might have left inside, maybe grab their credit cards." "But that's not what happened," Lopez said. It wasn't a question. "I was going through their stuff when I heard footsteps on the gravel. The husband, Mark, he'd heard something and came out to check on the car. He saw me with my hands in their glove compartment, and he started yelling, asking what the hell I was doing." Harlan paused, his breathing becoming more labored as he relived the events. Lopez could see the weight of 25 years of guilt pressing down on him. I tried to run, but he grabbed my arm. We started fighting, wrestling around between the cars. He was younger than me, stronger. I thought he was going to beat the crap out of me, so I pulled out my gun. "You brought a gun with you to rob their car?" Agent Reeves asked. "I always carried a gun back then. You had to, living the way I was living. But I didn't plan to use it, I swear. It just happened so fast. Mark was yelling for his wife to call the police, and I panicked. I shot him." The confession hit Lopez like a physical blow. She had known intellectually that Mark Thompson had been murdered, but hearing the casual way Harlan described taking a young man's life made her stomach turn. "Where exactly did this happen?" she asked. "Right there in the motel parking lot. Mark fell down between our cars, and there was blood everywhere. I thought for sure someone would have heard the gunshot, but nobody came out. It was so quiet in that little town." "What about Emily?" Harlan's face crumpled with what might have been genuine remorse. "She came running out when she heard the shot. When she saw her husband lying there dead, she started screaming. I mean really screaming, like an animal caught in a trap. I knew someone was going to hear her, so I grabbed her and put the gun to her head, told her to shut up or I'd kill her too." Lopez felt sick imagining the terror Emily must have experienced. Finding her husband dead, being threatened by his killer, knowing that her honeymoon had turned into a nightmare from which she might never escape. "Emily begged me not to hurt her," Harlan continued, his voice growing quieter. "She said they'd give me whatever I wanted, just please don't kill her. But I couldn't let her go. She'd seen my face, knew what I looked like. She could identify me. So what did you do?" "I made her help me load Mark's body into their car. She was crying the whole time, asking me to please just let her go, saying she wouldn't tell anybody what happened, but I couldn't trust that. I couldn't trust anybody." Agent Reeves consulted her notes. "The forensic evidence shows that Mark was shot in the back of the head. That's not consistent with a struggle face-to-face." Harlan's face flushed with anger. "You think I'm lying? You think I wanted to shoot some innocent kid? Fine, you want the whole truth. After Emily helped me get Mark in the car, I told her to get in the driver's seat. I said I was going to let her drive somewhere safe where I could let her go. But when she got behind the wheel, I shot her husband again, just to make sure he was dead. Then I got in the passenger seat and made her drive." The calculated coldness of this revelation shook even Lopez, who had seen plenty of violence in her. 20 years as a detective, Harlan hadn't just killed Mark Thompson in a moment of panic. He had executed him while his wife watched. "Where did you make her drive?" "There was this old logging road about 5 miles outside town. I'd seen it earlier when I was looking for a place to lay low. It was completely overgrown, looked like nobody had used it in years. I had her drive as far back into the woods as the car would go. Lopez was making rapid notes, trying to piece together the timeline and geography of the crime. The location Harlan described was consistent with where they had found the buried car. What happened when you got to the logging road? Harlan was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. I told Emily to get out of the car. She thought I was going to let her go, but I couldn't. I just couldn't risk it. I shot her. Where? In the back as she was walking away from the car. She fell face down in the dirt and didn't move again. Agent Reeves looked up from her notes. But Emily's remains were found in the passenger seat of the car, and the forensic evidence suggests she didn't die from a gunshot wound. Harlan's face went pale. What do you mean? I mean, Emily Thompson didn't die from being shot, Richard. She died from asphyxiation or dehydration. She was buried alive. The silence in the interview room was deafening. Lopez watched as the full horror of what Harlan had done seemed to dawn on him for the first time in 25 years. That's impossible, he whispered. I shot her. I saw her fall down. You missed, Agent Reeves said bluntly. Or maybe you just wounded her. Either way, Emily Thompson was alive when you buried that car. Harlan began to hyperventilate, his breathing coming in short, sharp gasps. No, no, no. She was dead. I checked. Her pulse. She wasn't breathing. Maybe she was unconscious from shock or blood loss, Lopez suggested. But she was alive, Richard. Emily Thompson spent her final hours trapped in a buried car next to her dead husband, probably calling for help. That never came. The weight of this revelation seemed to break something fundamental in Harlan. He began to sob uncontrollably, 25 years of suppressed guilt and horror finally pouring out. I didn't know, he kept repeating. I swear to God, I didn't know she was still alive. I thought she was dead. I wouldn't have buried someone alive, but Lopez wasn't sure she believed him. The forensic evidence suggested that Emily had survived for some time after being buried. Scratch marks found on the inside of the car doors indicated she had tried desperately to escape her underground tomb. Tell us about burying the car, Agent Reeves said once Harlan had regained some composure. I had to get rid of the evidence. I drove back into town and found some shovels at a construction site. It took me all night to dig a hole big enough for the car. I pushed it in and covered it up as best I could. And then what? I hitchhiked to Portland. I figured nobody would look for me there. A few days later, I got arrested for breaking into some house. I was actually relieved. I thought if I was in jail, nobody could connect me to what happened in Millbrook. Lopez studied Harlan's face, looking for any sign of deception. His story was horrible, but it was consistent with the evidence they had found. The location where he claimed to have buried the car matched where Jake Miller had discovered it. The timeline fit with Harlan's arrest in Portland 5 days later. Richard, we're going to need you to show us exactly where this happened, Lopez said. We'll need to search the burial site more thoroughly, and we'll need you to point out the logging road where you killed them. Harlan nodded weakly. I'll do whatever you want. I just want this to be over. Over the next several days, Harlan was transported back to Millbrook under heavy security. Media crews lined the streets as the prison transport van made its way to the crime scene, and Lopez found herself dealing with reporters from around the world who had descended on the small town. The return to the burial site was emotionally devastating for Harlan. He collapsed to his knees when he saw the excavated grave, sobbing as he pointed out exactly how he had positioned the car and covered it with earth. Crime scene technicians used ground-penetrating radar to search for any additional evidence that might have been missed during the original excavation. They found Emily's missing engagement ring buried in the dirt near where the car had been, apparently lost during the struggle. They also found shell casings from Harlan's gun and traces of blood that had somehow survived 25 years in the Oregon soil. But perhaps the most chilling discovery came when forensic specialists examined the recovered camcorder more thoroughly. Using advanced digital restoration techniques, they were able to recover additional footage that had been too damaged to view initially. The final recording showed Mark and Emily's last moments of happiness, driving through the Oregon countryside on the morning they disappeared. Emily was filming the scenery, narrating their plans to reach the coast by afternoon. The timestamp showed the recording had been made just hours before they encountered Richard Harlan. "We should be in Newport by dinner time," Emily's voice said, from the speakers in the forensics lab. "I can't wait to see the ocean, Mark. This is going to be the best honeymoon ever." The footage ended abruptly, and Lopez had to leave the room to compose herself. Hearing Emily's voice, so full of love and anticipation, knowing what was about to happen to her, was almost unbearable. The confession of Richard Harlan and the solving of the Thompson case sent shockwaves far beyond the small town of Millbrook, Oregon. What had begun as a routine highway construction project had uncovered one of the most haunting cold cases in Pacific Northwest history, and the media attention was unlike anything the region had ever experienced. Major television networks competed for exclusive interviews with Detective Sarah Lopez, who had become the face of the investigation. CNN, NBC, and CBS all sent their top crime correspondents to cover the story, while documentarians began planning feature-length films about the case. The story had everything that captured public imagination: young love destroyed by random violence, a decades-long mystery finally solved, and the persistence of law enforcement professionals who never gave up hope. But for Lopez, the media circus was secondary to the most difficult part of her job, notifying the families that their long nightmare was finally over. Emily Thompson's sister, Laura Bennett, was now 49 years old and living in suburban Denver with her husband and 2 teenage children. She'd spent 25 years not knowing whether her sister was alive or dead, holding on to a slowly fading hope that Emily and Mark might have simply chosen to disappear and start new lives somewhere far away. When Detective Lopez called to tell her that Emily's remains had been found, Laura's first reaction was relief. "After all these years of not knowing, at least now we have answers," she said through tears during their phone conversation. "We can finally lay them to rest properly." Laura immediately flew to Oregon to claim her sister's remains and to learn the details of what had happened. Meeting with Detective Lopez at the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department, she listened with growing horror as the full story of Richard Harlan's crime was revealed. "I keep thinking about how scared Emily must have been," Laura said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "She was always so trusting, so willing to see the good in people. She probably tried to reason with that monster, tried to convince him to let them go." Lopez found herself struggling to maintain her professional composure. The Thompson case had haunted her for her entire career, and finally solving it brought a mixture of satisfaction and deep sadness. Justice would be served, but it couldn't bring back 2 young people whose lives had been cut short by senseless violence. Mark Thompson's parents had both died in the intervening years. His father from a heart attack in 1995, his mother from cancer in 2003. Both had gone to their graves without knowing what happened to their son. Mark's younger brother, David, now lived in Phoenix and worked as an engineer. When Lopez contacted him, his reaction was anger rather than relief. 25 years, David said during their phone conversation. "My parents spent the last years of their lives wondering if their son was alive somewhere, if maybe he'd lost his memory or was being held against his will. The not knowing destroyed my mother. She never stopped hoping Mark would walk through the door someday." David's anger was directed not just at Richard Harlan, but at the original investigation in 1987. How could you miss this? How could a car be buried 5 miles from where they were last seen, and nobody thought to search that area? It was a fair question, and one that Lopez had asked herself many times over the years. The truth was that in 1987, the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department had been a small, underfunded operation with limited resources and outdated equipment. The logging road where Harlan had buried the car was one of dozens of such roads in the area, and without sophisticated search equipment, finding a buried vehicle was nearly impossible. "We did the best we could with what we had," Lopez told David. "But you're right. If we had the technology then that we have now, we might have found them much sooner." As news of Harlan's confession spread, other aspects of the case began to receive attention. Dorothy Henderson, now 76, and the last living link to Mark and Emily's final night, found herself at the center of media attention she neither wanted nor was prepared for. Reporters camped outside her small house behind the Pine Grove Motor Lodge, which had been sold years earlier and converted into vacation rentals. Dorothy granted a few interviews, but she found the process exhausting and emotionally draining. "I've lived with the guilt for 25 years, she told a reporter from the Portland Oregonian. "I keep thinking that if I had paid more attention that night, if I had called the police when I saw someone moving around outside, maybe those young people would still be alive." The reporter pressed her for details about Richard Harlan, asking what she remembered about his behavior and appearance. Dorothy's descriptions were remarkably accurate, matching police photos of Harlan from the 1980s down to the crude tattoos on his hands. "There was something wrong about him from the moment he walked into my office," Dorothy recalled. "The way his eyes kept moving around like he was looking for escape routes or planning something. I should have trusted my instincts." Mental health. Professionals who analyzed the case pointed out that Dorothy had no way of knowing what Harlan was planning, and that her observations during the night were actually crucial to solving the case decades later. Without her testimony about the mysterious Rick Hansen and her recollection of seeing someone near the Thompsons' car, investigators might never have made the connection to Richard Harlan. The legal proceedings against Harlan moved swiftly. Oregon District Attorney Michael Patterson announced that his office would seek the death penalty, citing the particularly heinous nature of the crimes and the fact that Emily Thompson had been buried alive. Harlan's court-appointed attorney, Patricia Wells, faced the nearly impossible task of defending a client who had already confessed in detail to double murder. Her strategy focused on Harlan's age. He was now 67 and in poor health, and argued that life imprisonment without parole would be a more appropriate sentence than execution. The preliminary hearings drew massive media attention, with courtroom artists sketching Harlan as he sat slumped in his wheelchair, looking far older than his years. Prison had not been kind to him, and 25 years of guilt appeared to have taken a severe physical toll. When Harlan was formally arraigned on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping and robbery, he entered a plea of guilty to all charges. His confession in court was brief but complete, acknowledging his responsibility for the deaths of Mark and Emily Thompson. "I know nothing I say can bring them back or ease the pain I've caused their families," Harlan said in a barely audible voice. "I've lived with what I did every day for 25 years, and I'm ready to accept whatever punishment the court decides." Judge Elizabeth Morrison sentenced Harlan to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, rejecting the death penalty due to his age and failing health. She also ordered him to pay restitution to the Thompson and Bennett families, though everyone understood that a career criminal with no assets would never be able to compensate them financially for their loss. "No sentence I can impose will bring back Mark and Emily Thompson," Judge Morrison said during the sentencing hearing, "but I can ensure that Richard Harlan will spend whatever time he has left on this earth paying for what he did to two innocent young people whose only crime was being in the wrong place at the wrong time." For Detective Lopez, the conclusion of the legal proceedings marked the end of the case that had defined her career. She had spent 25 years wondering what happened to the honeymoon couple, and now she finally had all the answers. The two Satisfaction of solving such a significant case was tempered by the knowledge that justice had come too late for Mark and Emily themselves. 3 months after Harlan's sentencing, Lopez announced her retirement from the Millbrook County Sheriff's Department. Her final case had been her most important, and she felt ready to pass the torch to a new generation of investigators. The retirement ceremony was held at the Pine Grove Motor Lodge, which had been restored to its 1987 appearance as part of a historical preservation project. Colleagues, family members, and members of the Thompson and Bennett families gathered to honor Lopez's dedication and persistence. Laura Bennett spoke at the ceremony, thanking Lopez for never giving up on her sister's case. Detective Lopez could have let this case gather dust in a filing cabinet like so many others, Laura said. Instead, she kept Emily and Mark's memory alive, and when their remains were finally discovered, she was ready to seek justice. We can never repay her for that gift. But perhaps the most unexpected consequence of solving the Thompson case was its impact on cold case investigations throughout the Pacific Northwest. The successful use of modern forensic technology to solve a decades-old crime inspired other law enforcement agencies to reopen their own unsolved cases. Within 6 months of Harlan's conviction, police departments in Washington, Oregon, and California had reopened more than 50 cold cases using DNA analysis, updated fingerprint databases, and ground-penetrating radar to search for new evidence. 2 other murder cases were solved directly as a result of the Thompson investigation. Richard Harlan's criminal history was re-examined in detail, and investigators found connections to unsolved crimes in California and Nevada that had occurred during his cross-country crime spree in the 1980s. In one case, Harlan's fingerprints were found to match evidence from a 1985 robbery murder in Fresno, California. The victim had been a convenience store clerk who was shot during what appeared to be a routine robbery. Harlan eventually confessed to this crime as well, providing closure to another family that had waited decades for answers. The technological aspects of the Thompson case also led to increased funding for forensic science programs in the region. The Oregon State Police received a federal grant to purchase new ground-penetrating radar equipment, while several counties upgraded their fingerprint analysis capabilities. Detective Lopez found herself in demand as a speaker at law enforcement conferences, where she shared the lessons learned from the Thompson investigation. Her presentations emphasized the importance of preserving evidence, maintaining detailed case files, and never completely closing cold cases. You never know when technology will advance enough to provide new answers, Lopez told an audience of detectives in Portland. DNA analysis was science fiction when Mark and Emily Thompson disappeared. Now it's routine. Who knows what technologies we'll have in another 25 years? The case also sparked discussions about victim advocacy and family support services. Laura Bennett became an activist for families of missing persons, working with organizations to provide counseling and legal assistance to people dealing with similar situations. The not knowing is almost worse than knowing the worst, Laura explained during a television interview. Families need support and resources, and law enforcement needs to understand the psychological impact of unsolved cases. 6 months after Richard Harlan's sentencing, he died in prison of a heart attack. He was 68 years old and had served less than a year of his life sentence. Some viewed his death as a form of justice, while others felt cheated that he had escaped the full consequences of his crimes. For Laura Bennett, Harlan's death brought a strange sense of closure. "I'm not glad that he died," she told reporters, "but I'm glad that he's no longer a burden on the taxpayers of Oregon, and I'm glad that he can never hurt anyone else." 2 years after the resolution of the Thompson case, the impact of the investigation continued to reverberate throughout the criminal justice system and beyond. What had begun as a construction project on a rural Oregon highway had become a catalyst for widespread changes in how missing persons cases were handled and how cold cases were investigated. The most immediate and visible change was the establishment of the Thompson Cold Case Initiative, a joint program between the Oregon State Police and the FBI that specifically focused on using modern technology to investigate decades-old disappearances. Funded by a combination of federal grants and private donations, the initiative had already reopened more than 100 cases across the Pacific Northwest. Detective Sarah Lopez, now 3 years into her retirement, found herself serving as a consultant to the program. Her experience with the Thompson case had made her something of an expert on the challenges of cold case investigations, and her insights were valued by a new generation of investigators. The key is persistence, Lopez told a room full of rookie detectives during a training session at the Oregon State Police Academy. Technology gives us tools our predecessors never had, but technology alone doesn't solve cases. You have to care enough to keep looking, to keep asking questions, to never completely give up hope. The classroom where Lopez spoke was named the Mark and Emily Thompson Memorial Training Room, part of a broader effort to honor the memory of the young couple whose deaths had led to so many improvements in law enforcement practices. Educational institutions throughout the region had incorporated the Thompson case into their criminal justice curricula. At Portland State University, the case was used as a comprehensive example of how investigations evolved over time and how advances in forensic science could provide new solutions to old mysteries. Professor Janet Morrison, who taught a course called Cold Case Investigations, used the Thompson case as the centerpiece of her curriculum. This case demonstrates every aspect of modern investigative work, she explained to her students. You have witness interviews, forensic analysis, database searches, geographic analysis, and psychological profiling, all working together to solve a crime that had stumped investigators for 25 years. Students in Professor Morrison's class were required to write detailed analyses of the Thompson investigation, examining how different approaches might have led to different outcomes. Many of these students went on to careers in law enforcement, carrying with them a deep appreciation for the complexity and importance of cold case work. The technological aspects of the Thompson case had also inspired innovations in forensic science. The successful recovery of video footage from the severely corroded camcorder led to advances in digital restoration technology that were now being used by investigators around the world. Dr. Patricia Williams, the forensic archaeologist, who had overseen the excavation of the Thompson car, became a leading advocate for the use of archaeological techniques in criminal investigations. Her work on the case demonstrated how careful, methodical excavation could preserve evidence that might otherwise be destroyed by hasty recovery efforts. Every crime scene is an archaeological site, Dr. Williams explained during a presentation at the International Association of Forensic Sciences conference. The same techniques we use to uncover ancient civilizations can be used to uncover evidence of recent crimes. The Thompson case proved that patience and precision in excavation can mean the difference between solving a case and losing crucial evidence forever. The case had also led to significant changes in how missing persons cases were initially handled. Law enforcement agencies throughout Oregon had adopted new protocols that emphasized immediate and thorough investigation of disappearances rather than waiting for cases to develop over time. Sheriff Tom Bradley of Millbrook County, who had taken over the department after Lopez's retirement, implemented a policy requiring that all missing persons cases be treated as potential homicides until proven otherwise. We learned from the Thompson case that waiting for more evidence can mean waiting too long, Bradley explained. Now we bring all our resources to bear immediately, while evidence is still fresh and witnesses' memories are still clear. These changes had already led to the successful resolution of several cases that might previously have gone unsolved. A missing college student was found alive after a comprehensive search that was launched within hours of her disappearance. A businessman who vanished during a hunting trip was located after investigators immediately began treating his case as a potential crime rather than an accident. The media attention surrounding the Thompson case had also raised public awareness about the importance of reporting suspicious activity and preserving potential evidence. Citizens throughout the region were more likely to contact police about unusual behavior, and they were more conscious of the importance of not disturbing potential crime scenes. Dorothy Henderson, now 79 and still living behind the former Pine Grove Motor Lodge, had become an unofficial spokesperson for witness responsibility and community vigilance. Despite her advanced age, she regularly spoke at community meetings about the importance of trusting one's instincts and reporting suspicious behavior to authorities. "I knew something was wrong about that man the night he checked into my motel," Dorothy told audiences, "but I didn't want to seem paranoid or judgmental. I've learned that it's better to be wrong about someone being suspicious than to be right about someone being dangerous and not say anything." Dorothy's presentations were particularly popular with business owners and hospitality workers who were often in positions to observe potentially criminal behavior. Hotels, motels, and bed and breakfast establishments throughout Oregon had implemented new policies requiring staff to report guests who seemed evasive or provided false information. The psychological impact of the Thompson case extended far beyond law enforcement and hospitality industries. Mental health professionals had studied the case as an example of how unresolved trauma could affect entire communities over decades. Dr. Rebecca Chen, a psychologist at Oregon Health Sciences University, had written extensively about what she termed community PTSD, the lasting psychological effects that unsolved crimes could have on the places where they occurred. Millbrook carried the weight of the Thompson disappearance for 25 years, Dr. Chen explained. Residents wondered if there was a killer among them, if their town was somehow cursed or dangerous. The resolution of the case allowed the community to finally process and move beyond this trauma. The healing process in Millbrook had been facilitated by a series of community events designed to honor Mark and Emily's memory while celebrating the resolution of the case. A memorial garden was established at the site where their car had been buried, featuring native Oregon plants and a stone bench where visitors could sit and reflect. The memorial had become a pilgrimage site for people dealing with their own experiences of loss and unresolved grief. Families of missing persons from across the country traveled to Millbrook to visit the garden and draw inspiration from the Thompson family's long journey to justice. Laura Bennett, now 51, had become a national advocate for families of missing persons. She had written a best-selling memoir titled Never Stop Looking: A Sister's 25-Year Search for Truth, which detailed her experience of living with uncertainty and her eventual journey to closure. The book had resonated with thousands of readers who were dealing with similar situations. Laura received letters from family members of missing persons around the world, thanking her for giving voice to their experiences and providing hope that answers might eventually come. Emily and Mark's story became bigger than just their story, Laura reflected during a recent interview. It became a symbol of hope for everyone who has lost someone and doesn't know what happened to them. If their case could be solved after 25 years, then maybe other cases can be solved too. Laura's advocacy work had led to the establishment of the Thompson Foundation, a non-profit organization that provided support services to families of missing persons and funded cold case investigations. The foundation had already contributed to the resolution of 12 previously unsolved cases, providing closure to families who had waited years or decades for answers. The foundation also funded scholarships for students pursuing careers in forensic science and criminal justice, ensuring that future investigators would have the training and resources necessary to solve complex cases. Recipients of Thompson Foundation scholarships were required to commit to working on cold cases for at least 2 years after graduation, creating a pipeline of investigators specifically dedicated to solving old mysteries. Perhaps the most lasting legacy of the Thompson case was its impact on how society viewed the value of persistence and the importance of never giving up hope. The story had been featured in countless documentaries, podcasts, and television programs, each focusing on different aspects of the 25-year journey from disappearance to resolution. A major motion picture based on the case was currently in production, with Academy Award-winning actress Jennifer Lawrence cast as Detective Lopez, and rising stars playing Mark and Emily Thompson. The film, titled Buried Truth, was scheduled for release the following year and was already generating significant interest from critics and audiences. The artistic interpretations of the Thompson story had helped to keep the case in the public consciousness, while also exploring deeper themes about love, loss, justice, and the passage of time. A critically acclaimed documentary had won several film festival awards and had been nominated for an Emmy. Podcasters had devoted entire seasons to examining every aspect of the case, reaching millions of listeners worldwide. These creative works served an important purpose beyond entertainment. They educated the public about the realities of criminal investigations and the importance of supporting law enforcement efforts to solve cold cases. They also honored the memory of Mark and Emily Thompson by ensuring that their story would not be forgotten. As the 5th anniversary of the case's resolution approached, plans were underway for a major symposium on cold case investigations to be held in Millbrook. The event would bring together law enforcement professionals, forensic scientists, victim advocates, and family members to share experiences and discuss best practices for investigating decades-old crimes. The symposium, officially called the Mark and Emily Thompson Memorial Conference on Cold Case Investigations, was expected to attract participants from around the world. It would feature presentations on the latest technological advances in forensic science, discussions of successful cold case resolutions, and workshops on supporting families of missing persons. Detective Lopez, now recognized as one of the nation's leading experts on cold case investigations, would deliver the keynote address. Her speech, titled Never Too Late for Justice, would focus on the lessons learned from the Thompson case and the importance of maintaining hope even in the face of seemingly impossible odds. Mark and Emily Thompson were murdered 25 years ago, but justice was not denied. It was just delayed, Lopez planned to tell the conference attendees. Their case proves that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply it's buried or how much time has passed. As investigators, as family members, and as a society, we must never stop believing that answers are possible. The Thompson case had become more than just a solved murder. It had become a symbol of hope, persistence, and the power of modern technology to illuminate even the darkest mysteries. The young couple who had set out on their honeymoon with such joy and optimism had in death inspired changes that would help countless other families find the answers they desperately sought. Their story served as a reminder that every missing person represents a family in anguish, a community in fear, and a mystery that deserves to be solved. In a world where new crimes occurred every day and resources were always limited, the Thompson case demonstrated the importance of never completely giving up on the quest for truth and justice. As visitors to the Memorial Garden in Millbrook often noted, Mark and Emily Thompson's love story had ended in tragedy, but their legacy lived on in every cold case that was reopened, every family that found closure, and every investigator who refused to stop looking for answers. In that sense, their honeymoon had never really ended. It had simply transformed into a different kind of journey, one that would continue to touch lives and solve mysteries for generations to come. What would you sacrifice to ensure the truth never stays buried? And how long would you wait for justice if it were your loved ones who vanished without a trace? If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more mysteries that prove some secrets can't stay hidden forever.